Fighter Conveyor, or FICON program. Military planners were concerned that the immense size and relatively slow speed of the B-36 would make it especially vulnerable to fighter aircraft. So, even before the B-36 was ready for service, they contracted with McDonnell Aircraft to produce a parasite jet, the XF-85 Goblin. It was intended that the Goblin be carried completely hidden in the belly of the B-36. In August 1948, this Goblin flight from a B-29 was a near-death experience for the pilot of the Goblin. In theory, the FICON concept was simple. In the event of a fighter attack, a parasite jet would be dropped from the bomber's fuselage by way of a trapeze mechanism. In the August test, pilot Ed Scorch flew for several minutes, but when he attempted to return to the mothership, violent turbulence knocked him into the trapeze. The Goblin's canopy was broken, and Scorch's oxygen mask was ripped away. It was only with superb flying that Scorch was able to return safely to the desert below. However, the first Goblin prototype was damaged beyond repair. Despite this setback, the program was not canceled. The following October, the second Goblin prototype dropped from the Superfortress and flew. Because of an improved training program, it hooked its trapeze without incident and was pulled into the mothership. But the concept presented more problems than it solved. The Goblin program was eventually scrapped.
The McDonnell XF-85 Goblin was a product of the brand new Air Force, recently formed in 1947, but was not a new concept entirely. As these photographs show, parasite fighters have gone all the way back to the beginning days of aviation. Initially, they tried mounting aircraft on top of other bombers, and then they tried mounting aircraft underneath airships, and one point even tried mounting them inside the airships, such as the USS Macon and the USS Akron. This project went even further when they attempted to attach a guided bomb underneath a German fighter, as seen here. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and have a look at the stats on the in-game XF-85 Goblin. Here we have all of the American, Russian, and German fighters, heavy fighters, and multi-roles, and I have highlighted the stats as they differentiate from those different types. As you can see here, there's many points where the XF-85 Goblin is much better than its competition, and then there's many points where it's not quite as good as its competition. Overall, I think it's pretty fair and balanced against these aircraft. The same goes for the Japanese and UK lines, and in some cases, it's almost wholly better than its competition. You can see that it has much better altitude performance than pretty much everything else in its class. At some points it's the same, but overall it's much better. So let's hop right into the meat of what you've come to watch this video of, and see the Goblin in action. So the first thing I wanted to test out is how well the aircraft performs at altitude. As I stated previously, the XF-85 is pretty good reaching those top altitudes and performing up there. The one downside you have in this aircraft is that it is a fighter, so it only gets the 6-second boost. Even with that said, as you can see here, the aircraft has no real issue climbing the 3,000 meters, and even beyond that into the red, it still carries its speed quite well. The best part of this aircraft comes after this. When you reach the red line and the aircraft is no longer able to maintain or accelerate in speed, you just kind of fall off. And the one thing we look for is any kind of an aircraft pilot is something that has very good stall characteristics. This aircraft has pretty phenomenal stall characteristics. You carry your flight performance all the way through the stall envelope and are able to easily recover, as I demonstrate here. Now the XF-85 only has 4 Browning AN M3 50 caliber machine guns. Now while that doesn't sound a lot for a Tier 9 aircraft, it's still quite capable at putting a good chunk out of every airplane you come across. The more you find an issue with is when you start running into the aircraft that are able to turn much faster, or they maneuver all over the air. That makes it a little bit harder for you to keep your 50 calibers on target long enough to do a substantial amount of damage. The larger the aircraft and the slower it moves around the sky, the much easier you can do damage to it, but generally speaking, those aircraft also have more hit points. You would really think this is where the 50 calibers start to struggle, but I didn't really find much of an issue with it. Because its aircraft performance is pretty good in the roll and yaw and pitch axes, you're able to stay with just about everything with only a couple of exceptions, such as the Yak-19. Even the Yak-19 doesn't perform as well enough to cause you a major issue when you're fighting with it. Everything else is fairly easy pickings, honestly. As I've demonstrated in the last few shots, you get to see how quickly it tears through fighters and multi-rolls. So what I wanted to do was make sure that I showed you going after a, I don't know, ground attack aircraft or heavy fighter, and specifically in this clip here, I wanted to show you how it performs against the much vaunted IL-40. As you can see, it does a fair bit of damage even with 450 calibers, and I only start to overheat towards the end. That doesn't cause much of an issue for me though, because I'm able to keep my guns on target, even though it's just a bot, throughout the whole thing. Here I go after an RB-17, and as you can see again, even though I'm overtaking the aircraft and the airplane is quite fast, I might add, you're able to slow down sufficiently in order to target him. The only major downside to that is that the RB-17 carries a 20mm gun, same as the IL-40, and you will take a pretty substantial amount of damage if you stay behind them like that. So I don't recommend it, but I did want to demonstrate that you are capable of taking out even the aircraft with much larger hit point pools. Now I'm going after an XF-5U, one of the most feared Tier 8 heavy fighters. It can maneuver, it can go fast, and its guns are quite deadly. This plane has no real issue staying with it. Now at this point in the game I haven't quite equipped my plane with any equipment yet, so this is pretty much base stock. I don't have a 9 points pilot in here, I just have 6 points, which is quite easy to maintain once you get up to Tier 8. I also wanted to throw in a clip of attacking a bomber flight just so you can see how the 50 calibers perform against a much larger, much heavier target. As you can see, I tear through the first couple without much of an issue, and I am sacrificing hit points, so I wouldn't recommend going after bomber flights, but you can if necessary. Just taking my time, knocking down the last bombers, and we didn't quite get them before they got to the cap. Moving on though, I start going after other airplanes, and as you can see, you do knock a pretty large chunk of hit points off of them pretty quickly. So don't be afraid of those 50 calibers. They may not be 20mm, but they're sufficient. The main thing that you need to worry about this plane, as you just saw, is that if you start taking damage, you need to move immediately. The aircraft does not survive very well, and that's probably the major downfall of this plane. Because you only have a small hit point, I decided to run this aircraft with improved coverings so that I had the additional hit points. Also, I would not recommend trying to go head-on with any airplane, as you just saw me fail an F-86A head-on when he's got 6 of the same guns that I do. I didn't even get close to hitting him before I exploded. There we have arrows just decimating me from pretty much full health without me even noticing. So be very careful. If you start seeing tracers near you, you need to start maneuvering. And last but not least, you absolutely positively do not want to get into a prolonged turn fight, especially against the XF-85 Goblin, which you see here. So now that we're running out of time to purchase the XF-85 Goblin, I'm sure the question that everybody has is it worth it? Should I purchase this plane? Is it going to do anything for me? Yes. Absolutely yes, 100% yes, it's going to be worth it. I was not very good in this plane when I first started, and I was still pulling in around 150,000 credits per game. That's pretty good, considering not very good for me was around 3,000 points. You can overcome some of its downsides without much of an issue, so don't worry about that. The plane is an excellent crew trainer and excellent credit earner, if nothing else. I highly recommend you pick this up, as it might not be coming back. So, In summation, yes, you should buy this plane. Yes, it turns well. Yes, it dies quickly. And yes, it only has 450 calibers, but as you saw, those 450 calibers can still do a good bit of work. Just don't ever get yourself caught in front of a J7W2 in a long, drawn-out air battle. I'd like to say thanks so much to Wargaming North America, World of Warplanes North America, Sonic Pariah, BTED, and AeroZ for ruining my B-roll footage. As always, my name is Lambo. If you're ever thinking of taking your own life, take 1 minute, give this number a call. If you can't call this number, call somebody. Spare a minute. Thank you. Goodbye.